Mary was on her way to the cemetery, a journey she made every Saturday as part of a ritual of love and remembrance she had maintained for the past 5 years since the death of her husband, Edward. They had been soulmates, inseparable and deeply connected, until a brutal and unexpected illness took Edward away. Now, at 55, Mary lived alone, surrounded by the memories of the life they had shared. Upon arriving at the cemetery, Mary was greeted with warm waves and salutations from the staff. They all knew her story, the woman who, rain or shine, never failed to visit her beloved Edward's grave on Saturdays. This recognition and empathy were a small consolation, as the staff had become an extended part of her family in a way. Following her familiar rituals, she replaced the candle and meticulously cleaned the headstone, removing the dried flowers from the previous week. However, on this particular day, Mary realized she had forgotten to bring new flowers, a rare slip in her otherwise meticulous routine. She walked to the cemetery's flower shop and purchased fresh roses, Edward's favorites. When she returned, she encountered an unusual scene. A small boy, about 7 years old, was sitting at Edward's grave, alone and looking thoughtful. Mary approached gently, her curiosity piqued. "Hello," she said softly, trying not to startle the boy. "Are you okay?" "Yes," replied the boy, looking up at her with a mix of surprise and curiosity for being noticed. "Where are your parents?" Mary asked, glancing around, concerned about the possibility of the boy being lost. "I don't know where they are," he said with a worrying innocence. "I came with a man I don't know very well." "What's your name?" Mary inquired, trying to understand the situation. "Edward," the boy answered. The coincidence of the name made Mary's heart skip a beat, a wave of emotion washing over her. "The same name as my husband," she thought, surprised and somewhat emotional. "Edward, who exactly brought you here?" Mary asked, her concern growing. "A friend of my mom's. She said I could come here to see where people rest. He went to meet someone and told me to wait here," Edward explained. Mary looked around, noticing there was no sign of the man Edward mentioned. She decided she couldn't leave the boy alone and sat beside him. "Have you been here before, Edward?" Mary asked as she placed the roses on the grave. "No, it's my first time. It's a quiet place. I like it," he said, looking at the roses with interest. "These were Edward's favorite flowers, the one who rests here," Mary explained, feeling strangely comfortable talking to the boy about her husband. "He loved nature." "My mom likes flowers too," Edward said, a shy smile crossing his face. They continued talking, with Mary growing increasingly worried about the absent adult who had accompanied the boy. She knew she couldn't leave him alone. Left alone, Mary began to plan her next steps, considering whether to involve the cemetery staff or even the police if necessary. During their conversation, young Edward, with the innocent logic of a child, mentioned that the grave marked with the name Edward must be his grandfather's, since they shared the same name. Mary, though surprised by the coincidence, smiled at the boy's innocence, finding a bit of lightness in the unusual situation. They continued to sit together beside the grave, talking about various topics. Edward chatted about his school, his friends, and his favorite games, while Mary shared stories about her husband, whose grave they were visiting. However, as time passed and the daylight began to fade, Mary's concern grew. There was no sign of any responsible adult for the boy, and the cemetery would soon be closing. Finally, deciding she could wait no longer, Mary took Edward to the cemetery staff, asking if anyone had seen an adult looking for a child or if they recognized the boy. Unfortunately, none of the staff knew Edward or had any information about his companions. Feeling she had no other options, Mary called the police, worried but knowing it was the best course of action for the boy's safety. While waiting for the police to arrive, Edward started showing signs of anxiety, looking around nervously and repeatedly asking for his father. "What's your father's name, Edward?" Mary asked, trying to distract him and gather information that might help. "Dario," the boy replied, swinging his legs nervously. Soon, a police car arrived at the cemetery. 2 officers approached Mary and Edward with care and gentleness, asking questions to understand the situation and gather as much information as possible. "We'll check the cemetery's security cameras to see if we can find who brought you here, Edward," one of the officers explained. The security cameras revealed footage of a man wearing a cap, glasses, and a mask, leading Edward by the hand to Edward's grave. With the information provided by the boy, the police were able to find Dario's phone number. When they contacted him, they discovered that Dario was desperately searching for his son after realizing he hadn't returned from his mother's house. Dario quickly drove to the cemetery, anxious but hopeful to find his son safe and sound. Upon arriving, Dario ran towards Edward, who lit up with a smile and shouted with joy upon seeing his father. The reunion was emotional, with Dario hugging his son tightly and thanking Mary and the police for taking care of him. The situation at the cemetery remained tense as the police continued to ask questions, trying to piece together the events. Mary, though just an accidental witness, found herself deeply involved, listening to every detail. Dario explained that Edward's mother had asked to spend a day with their son, something he had agreed to, never imagining anything could go wrong. However, as the hours passed without news, his anxiety grew. When the police showed him the footage of the unknown man leading Edward to the cemetery, Dario admitted he had never seen the man before and was both confused and alarmed. "Who was that man, son?" Dario asked Edward, hoping the boy could offer some clue. "I don't know, Daddy. I just know that sometimes he would hang out with Mommy," Edward replied, his voice low and hesitant. "Did you like him?" Dario continued, trying to understand the context. "No, he was mean. He yelled at me and Mommy," Edward confessed, making Dario frown with visible anger. The police continued their investigation while Dario tried unsuccessfully to contact Edward's mother, who wasn't answering her phone. This only increased Dario's worry and frustration, fearing for both Edward's and her safety. After a long period of questioning and checks, the police finally allowed Dario and Edward to leave. Before leaving, Dario made sure to approach Mary, who had been an unexpected and valuable support during the incident. "Thank you so much for everything, Mary. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here with my son," Dario said, genuinely grateful. "No need to thank me, Dario. I just did what I'd hoped someone would do for me in a similar situation." "Take good care of him," Mary replied, smiling at Edward, who shyly smiled back. Dario and Edward walked away, leaving Mary alone at the cemetery. Alone with her thoughts, Mary walked slowly back home, the unexpected encounter with young Edward still echoing in her mind. The boy was charming and intelligent, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness as she returned to the quiet of her house. Since her husband Edward had passed away, she often imagined herself surrounded by a larger family, perhaps with grandchildren running through the garden. However, that was a dream that would never come to fruition. In the solitude of her home, Mary missed the conversation and the vibrant presence of little Edward. That brief encounter had brought a kind of joy and a welcome distraction to her usually solemn Saturdays. Now, with the house silent once again, she reflected on the strange way lives can intersect, even under such peculiar circumstances. A few days after the incident at the cemetery, Mary received an unexpected call from the local police, informing her that they needed her testimony regarding what had happened with young Edward. Apparently, the case had taken a more serious turn, and her witness statement was crucial. With a mix of concern and civic duty, Mary agreed and headed to the police station at the appointed time. Upon arrival, she was greeted by a serious-looking officer who promptly informed her of the latest developments in the case. "The man who brought Edward to the cemetery has been arrested. We discovered he has a long criminal record. We need all the details you can provide about that day," the officer explained, guiding Mary to an interview room. Mary gave her statement clearly, recalling every detail of her encounter with the boy and describing the man captured by the cemetery's security cameras. She tried to stay focused despite the anxiety of being involved in such a complicated case concerning a child. After finishing her statement, as she exited the room, Mary saw Dario in the hallway of the police station. He looked tired but relieved to see her. "Mary, it's so good to see you. Edward is at home, safe with the babysitter." The police thought it best not to bring him here to spare him any further distress. "How is he doing? Is he recovering from all this?" Mary asked, genuinely concerned for the boy's well-being. "He's doing okay, considering the circumstances, but there's still a lot to sort out. His mother is giving her statement now," Dario explained. glancing briefly towards the interrogation room before turning back to Mary. It was as if he needed to unburden himself. I should have seen this coming. Edward's mother has never been responsible. On the day that man took Edward to the cemetery, she was drinking with friends and could barely stand. She hardly cares about him, Dario confessed, frustration evident in his voice. Dario, you couldn't have known this would happen. You're doing the best you can. Mary tried to offer some comfort, though she knew her words could do little to alleviate his guilt. I feel so guilty for letting her take him, even for a day. I promised myself I would protect my son, and I failed, Dario continued, clearly tormented by the decision he had made. Mary, though unable to solve Dario's problems, offered her empathy, listening attentively as he spoke. After a few minutes, Dario thanked Mary for being there and for everything she had done for Edward at the cemetery. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't looked after him until I got there. You have a huge heart, Dario said, offering a grateful smile. Tired, Dario said, It was nothing, Mary. Anyone would have done the same. I just hope this gets resolved soon for Edward's sake. Mary nodded, wishing them strength and resolution. She watched Dario with a mixture of sympathy and respect as he confided his fears about the future. The bond they shared was deeper than blood. It was a connection of love and responsibility. He's not my biological son, Dario began to explain, his voice thick with emotion. When I met Edward's mother, she was already pregnant. I decided to raise him as my own from the start, but I never officially registered him as my son. Mary listened attentively, understanding the complexity of his situation. When we separated, she didn't bother taking him with her. She left him with me. I love him like my own son, and I'm terrified that legally, I might lose him someday. Dario's voice was filled with palpable worry. Edward is very lucky to have someone like you, Mary affirmed with conviction. You are the father he knows and loves. That's what truly matters. Dario nodded, appreciating Mary's comforting words. However, their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the interview room door opening. They both turned to see who was coming out. Mary's eyes widened in shock as she recognized the woman stepping out, a face she hadn't expected to see there. Isabella, she exclaimed, her voice louder than she intended. Isabella, Edward's mother, stopped abruptly, clearly surprised and confused to see Mary there. Mom, what are you doing here? Isabella asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dario looked from one woman to the other, trying to understand the connection. Dario, this is my daughter, Mary explained, still incredulous at the tragic coincidence of it all. Dario was visibly shocked, words failing to form as he processed the revelation. Isabella, clearly nervous and perhaps a bit defensive, turned to argue with Dario, momentarily ignoring Mary. Because of you, I'm in a huge mess with the police involved, Isabella accused, her tone brimming with anger. I didn't call the police, Isabella. Mary did, Dario corrected, trying to calm the situation. Isabella turned sharply towards Mary, her face contorted with frustration. Even after all these years, you continue to ruin my life, Mom, she exclaimed, each word laden with resentment. Mary, despite being hurt by the accusations, maintained her composure. She knew well the pain and complexity behind her daughter's words. Isabella, I was here by chance. I found Edward at the cemetery, alone and lost. I did what anyone would have done. I called the police because I was worried about his safety, Mary explained calmly, choosing her words carefully to avoid escalating the situation. No matter what you say, Mom, you always find a way to meddle where you're not wanted, Isabella retorted, clearly unable to see beyond her own frustration. Dario watched the exchange between mother and daughter, feeling simultaneously out of place and concerned for Edward's well-being. He knew the family situation was delicate and complex, and though he didn't want to interfere, he felt that Edward needed stability and love now more than ever. When Isabella turned and left the police station, Mary felt the weight of the silence that fell between her and her daughter. Each step Isabella took seemed to distance them further from one another. Overcome with emotion, Mary let her tears fall, lamenting the 5 years of estrangement that now seemed deeper and more irreparable. Her tears still glistened on her cheeks when they were interrupted by the arrival of a police officer. The officer explained the situation, detailing the events that led to Edward's temporary disappearance. After picking up her son, Isabella had been invited to a party and irresponsibly left the boy home alone. When Isabella's boyfriend arrived and found the child there, he expressed his displeasure, saying he was tired of Edward's presence and wanted to get rid of him. Knowing Mary's habits through Isabella, who knew Mary visited the cemetery every Saturday, the boyfriend took Edward there, hoping that the grandmother would find him and take responsibility for him. Upon hearing this, Mary realized the gravity of the situation, not just for herself but for her grandson, Edward. A mixture of emotions overwhelmed her: surprise at discovering she was a grandmother and sorrow over her daughter's situation. After the officer left, allowing Dario and Mary to absorb the news, Dario, now aware that Mary was Edward's grandmother, suggested she come to his house to see the boy. "You must be wanting to see him, right?" Dario asked, a gentle tone in his voice. "Yes, very much. Thank you, Dario. I really would," Mary responded, still trying to adjust to this new reality. As Mary drove to Dario's house, she opened up about her relationship with Isabella, sharing the challenges they had faced since Isabella's childhood. Isabella was always a difficult child. "We argued a lot because she often got into trouble. As she got older, she simply left home and rarely returned. The last time I saw her was at her father's funeral, and after that, she disappeared completely. She never even told me she had a child," Mary confided, her words laden with sadness and regret. Upon arriving at Dario's house, Mary was greeted with a warm hug by Edward, the child's face beaming with innocent joy. Dario gently and carefully explained to Edward who Mary really was. "Edward, this is Mary, your grandmother," Dario said, watching the boy's reaction closely. Edward looked at Mary with a bright smile and exclaimed with enthusiasm, "I knew it! The grave where you found me was my grandfather's." This confirmation brought a sense of closure for Edward and a new beginning for Mary. They spent the rest of the day together, talking and getting to know each other better. Mary quickly realized that without Dario's dedication, Edward might have faced a very different fate, perhaps lost in the difficulties of urban life without proper guidance. In the days that followed, Mary became a constant presence in Dario's home. She visited daily, cherishing every moment to strengthen her bond with Edward, who seemed to thrive under his grandmother's attention and love. Dario, although often busy with work, felt relieved and grateful for Mary's help, especially during the afternoons when Edward was usually under the care of a nanny. "Mary, I don't know how to thank you for all your help. Edward loves spending time with you." Dario expressed his gratitude during one of their conversations. "No need to thank me, Dario. Taking care of Edward is a pleasure for me. He has brought a new purpose to my life," Mary replied, feeling a peace she hadn't known in a long time. This new routine brought a sense of family and community that both Mary and Dario deeply valued. However, this harmony was disrupted one day by the unexpected arrival of Isabella at Dario's house. She announced that she wanted to take Edward to spend a few days with her, a decision that took Dario and Mary by surprise. "Isabella, are you sure this is the best thing for Edward right now?" Dario questioned, clearly concerned about the boy's stability. "He is my son, Dario, and I want to spend some time with him. Can't I?" Isabella responded, her tone defensive and firm. Mary, trying to mediate the situation, decided to have a conversation with Isabella. The discussion quickly became tense, as often happened between mother and daughter. "Isabella, I'm not trying to control you. I'm trying to help you see the right path. You've always involved yourself with the wrong people and made decisions that put you at risk," Mary argued, her motherly concern evident. "Mom, you never let me be myself. You always think you know what's best for me." "It's not fair," Isabella retorted, her frustration palpable. Not wanting to prolong the argument, Isabella took Edward and left, leaving Mary and Dario worried and somewhat desolate. Mary felt a deep pain watching her daughter leave again, especially taking Edward, whose stability she had come to value so much. After Isabella and Edward left, Mary and Dario sat in silence, pondering the future and what it held for all of them. Dario was clearly worried, but Mary, despite her own concerns, tried to offer some comfort. "Dario, let's give her a chance. Maybe Isabella needs this time with Edward to realize the importance of motherhood. And if anything goes wrong, We'll be here for Edward, as we always have been, Mary said, trying to keep hope alive. Both knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but they were determined to do whatever it took to ensure that Edward grew up in a loving and secure environment, regardless of the difficulties that Isabella might bring. The unfolding situation between Dario, Isabella, and Edward had been complex and emotionally charged, but Mary and Dario were resolved to face it together for Edward's sake. Dario, with the unwavering support of Mary, was deeply concerned about Edward's well-being. He couldn't believe that Isabella had not only decided to stay with their son, but also demanded child support. When Dario shared the news with Mary, she was equally shocked by her daughter's behavior. How could she do this? Mary lamented, her voice trembling with indignation. She has barely been present in Edward's life, and now she wants to take everything from you, Dario. I just don't understand. Mary, I only want what's best for Edward, Dario responded, his expression heavy with worry. The days leading up to the court hearing were grueling, filled with a painful absence of Edward, whose joy and innocence had become an integral part of their lives. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Dario and Isabella faced each other in court, an atmosphere thick with tension and anticipation. The judge, a sharp-eyed middle-aged woman, listened attentively to the lawyer's arguments before beginning her questioning. Mr. Dario, since when have you been taking care of Edward? The judge asked. Since his birth, Your Honor, Dario responded, his voice steady. And Ms. Isabella, what have you done for the boy? The judge turned her gaze to Isabella. Dario hesitated, looking at Isabella, who quickly interjected. I visit my son, Isabella said, trying to appear confident. The judge, with a hint of sarcasm, replied, Congratulations on doing the bare minimum. She then continued, looking directly at Dario. And does she provide financial support for the boy? No, Your Honor, Dario answered simply. Why do you want custody of Edward and, on top of that, child support? The judge addressed Isabella again. Now that I'm no longer in a relationship, I want to be more present in my son's life. And since Dario earns more than I do, I think it's fair for him to help me financially, Isabella explained, attempting to justify her position. And why have you always left Edward with Dario? The judge asked. I was in a relationship with a violent man and spent little time with my son, Isabella confessed, lowering her gaze. After hearing this admission, the judge paused for a moment before speaking. Isabella, you allowed a violent man into your home and prioritized him over your own son. Your actions put your child's life at risk, yet you ask for child support from a man who has cared for your son without any legal obligation. The courtroom fell silent as the judge took a dramatic pause, everyone awaiting her decision. I have made my decision, the judge announced. Isabella, you will pay child support to Dario, who will retain custody of Edward. If he so wishes, he may legally register the boy as his own. Isabella, visibly shocked and furious with the decision, had to swallow her anger. She wanted to protest, to shout against the verdict she felt was unjust, but she knew that any outburst would only worsen her situation. Mary and Dario, relieved by the court's decision, felt gratified knowing that Edward would be safe and well cared for. As they walked out of the courtroom, Mary placed a hand on Dario's shoulder, offering a silent thank you for the love and dedication he had shown to her grandson. The bond between them had been further strengthened by this trial, and both knew that from now on, all that mattered was Edward's well-being. After the tumultuous court decision, life for Edward, Mary, and Dario gradually returned to normal. Mary, in particular, found immense pleasure and purpose in caring for her grandson, cherishing every moment spent teaching him and watching him grow. Dario's home became a haven of love and care, a place where Edward could feel safe and cherished. One day, Isabella made an unexpected visit to Dario's house, bringing with her a wave of initial tension. With teary eyes and a trembling voice, Isabella expressed her desire to spend time with Edward. I really miss my son, Dario. I would like to spend some time with him, she said, clearly nervous about how her request would be received. Dario, cautious but understanding the importance of the mother-child bond, agreed to Isabella's request but imposed a condition. All right, Isabella, you can spend time with him, but Mary will be present, he said. unwilling to take any risks with Edward's safety. Isabella hesitated for a moment, but ultimately agreed, recognizing that this was the only way to be with her son at that time. During the visit, Mary observed Isabella interacting with Edward. She noticed that despite her past mistakes, Isabella seemed genuinely trying to connect with her son. Mary, although still wary and cautious, began to see signs of change in her daughter, knowing that only time would tell if these changes were genuine and lasting. Isabella's visits became more frequent, and over time, the relationship between Mary and Isabella began to show signs of healing. There was still a visible distance between them, a remnant of the many pains and misunderstandings of the past, but Edward's presence acted as a bridge between the two. During one of these visits, as Edward played quietly, Isabella opened her heart to Mary. "Mom, I miss Dad a lot. That's why I named Edward after him. I wanted something of him to stay with me," Isabella confessed, her words laden with nostalgia and pain. "I know, dear. Your father loved you very much, and I'm sure he would be proud to see the young man Edward is becoming," Mary replied, feeling a pang of sadness as she remembered her husband. Inspired by these shared emotions, Mary, Isabella, and Edward decided to visit the cemetery where Edward's grandfather was buried. Together, they walked through the serene paths of the cemetery until they reached Edward's gravestone. There, the three of them joined in prayer, a moment of peace and reflection on the past, present, and future. As they rose to leave, a gentle breeze blew over them, bringing with it a sense of freshness and renewal. It seemed, in some way, to be a sign that despite all the challenges and storms they had faced, there was hope in the possibility of a better future.